me. I think we have 40% fellows, I'm a fellow too, and 60% members of the public. This talk is designed for everyone, but particularly members of the public. As you will see, I have long loved Latin names, but not everybody does, and I felt that the book may make the big difference. Everybody seems to hate Latin names, but I think they are superb things. They are useful, they are beautiful, they are essential. Right. The reason I gave up cabinet making, because it's the worst way of making a living on the planet. I went 25 years without paying income tax because I didn't reach the tax threshold. Mind you, being a writer doesn't seem to be an awful lot better, but this is about the naming of the shrew. I haven't got my name on there, that's terrible. The name of the shrew is Sorex eranius, which means spider mouse, and we'll perhaps see this later. That is two nouns in that position. It's a sort of spidery mouse, if you like. Anyway, that's the beginning. Oh, I've got a little quiz for you. This is an icebreaker, also to give you something to think about should you get bored halfway through, or even a quarter of the way through. Okay, can you think of two or more Latin names which are also effectively common names? You'll know when I say, don't put your hand up, just think of it, and then maybe I have a prize of a free book to anybody who comes out with two, and they need at least two. Yeah, you read the book, haven't you? No. Yeah, well, it's not gorilla, is it? Or gorilla, savigai. So it needs to be a bino. We need one more. But there may be three or four. Viperus Vitus viper, isn't it? So no, we don't call it viper. No, that's the wren. You know, the wren. So it's a common name and the Latin name is who? Yeah, but it's not the binomial. It needs to be a binomial, but to both parts. You think about it, all right? That's one. It's a plant. Okay. Huh? Did someone say that again? Who said that? A plant. No, it's not that one, no. It needs to be two words. Okay, let's get on with the show. A note on Latin. May I say, I went to grammar school in Portsmouth. I did 2.5 years of Latin before I got chucked out. In those 2.5 years, I learnt absolutely nothing. Have learned very little since. I felt that writing a book on Latin names was going to be a bit of a challenge and a foolish thing to do. It was particularly embarrassing when, in the early days, it was the best-selling book on Latin on Amazon, which is my poor Latin tutor will be turning in his grave, and that he's still alive and 140 years old. I thought, in a way, it's encouraging that I love Latin names and can write a book about Latin. So it means you don't need to know Latin to understand the names and to enjoy them. Can I say, are there many Latin scholars here this evening? If you do A-level Latin or degree-level Latin? Not me, three of you. Three potential troublemakers over on the right. A note on pronunciation. I have very strong views on pronunciation. Everybody seems to, but of course people get very nervous about pronunciation. Should we have a little practice? This is a fairly simple and straightforward one. Notio-cryptorhynchus, which means a hidden mark on the nose. Notio is a mark, and crypto is hidden, and rhynchus, of course, his nose. Well, that wasn't too bad. How about this one? This is a fairly light-hearted talk. There's a little bit of depth later on. I think you're doing very well. But I dare say you could guess what sort of animal it could be. It's a spider. I don't believe this thing ever exists. It exists only there's only one reference to it, and that is Theodore Savary's lovely 1955 book on the naming of nature, and it doesn't appear anywhere else. I reckon he just made it up. Effectively, it's a nomen nudum, so it has no basis in an actual specimen. But we do have a real one. Okay. This has been synonymized, though it's no longer current, but it's... shall I do it? It's Gamerocanthus chaetodermagarrus loricato bicalensis. So, a round of applause, I think, is due for that. No, not really. This was by Dubosky, who was, I think he was 97 when he came out with this and other great gems. And I fancy it's more a matter of playful old age than senility, where you'd never be able to produce that if you're senile. So good luck to. By the way, the thing itself is about that big. It's one of those things that jump around on the sand when you're trying to have a picnic. And you can see where it came from. Lake Baikal, yeah, okay. I fiddle around with these slides, and I've given this talk about 10 times maybe, and the next slide is always as much a surprise to me as it is to you, so let's see what's next. Yes, how did I get into Latin names? Well, when I was at school, there was this nice girl who was very keen on natural history, and of course I tried to impress her by pretending that I was interested in it. But then I went out with my friend Peter Marsden and went to the New Forest, and we came across this thing, which I'm sure many of you will know. Yeah, Drosera. So this is and I was so impressed by this thing, and I dug one up. Perhaps I shouldn't have done. I wouldn't do it now. There are hundreds of thousands of them still in the New Forest, nestling in the sand. And I went to the library. I was a denizen of the Portsmouth Central Library, and I looked it up, and I found it had a name, and this is it, Drosera Rotundifolia, and I was just so taken by this name. It's beautiful. It just trips off the tongue. Drosera Rotundifolia. I thought, well, what does it mean? And so I looked that up. From the Greek, Drosera for dewy, which is with the little sticky bits which trap the flies, and well, Rotundifolia, round leaves, which is rather nice. I noticed one other thing. That's the L at the end. And, well, what a joy this is. Well, I normally have this slide, but we've got the original here. That's wonderful. It's the same one. It's a different one. Can't see from here. He is honoured by the fact that he has a single letter. If I named a species, it would be Agaricus smithii, John Frederick Wright, because it definitely wouldn't be W, because I'm not famous enough by a long way. Wonder what comes next. Well, this tells me on here. It's clever, isn't it? Oh yeah, I found out that there are others. There are others. There's Drosera anglica, which is the great sundew, and Drosera intermedia, which is the oblong-leaf sundew, presumably is halfway between the other two. But it wasn't plants that would take my interest. It would be fungi, and I'm 35-year-long member of the British Mycological Society. And I found this in the New Forest as well on a piece of ash, and I got so... I was actually appalled with myself that I did not know what this thing was. It doesn't look as though it can possibly be alive. They're about that big, and it looks like a piece of charcoal. It's Daudinia concentrica. That's another nice name. If you break one in half, you will see it has concentric rings. Daudinia is a reference to burnt wood. So it worked out rather nicely. And now, as Alethea said, I take mushroom forays. Well, they call it foraging. Really, it's a trick. It's a way of getting people out into the countryside. I pretend I'm going to show them all about food, wild food, but I do that. But I try to do much more and actually introduce them to the natural world. But of course, people don't like the Latin names, and so people ask me things like that. They say, John, have you seen any trooping pink fairy bonnets recently? And I always say, with the most pleasant smile I can manage, I haven't got the faintest idea what you're talking about, because I don't like the common names of the fungi. When I started, I've got the book here. When I started, this book actually wasn't published, but when I started, gosh, in 1965 or 66, thereabouts, there were no common names for the fungi. Well, there were a few. I mean, this is the 1980 copy of Corticoides and Duhem's Guide to the Fungi, Collins, a nice popular guide, well, popular for some. And there's lots of, there's 1,750 pictures in there, 1,750 species mentioned, and if you look at the index in the back, there's 1,750 Latin names and 100 common names. Basically, I had to learn the Latin names. That's what got me started. If only botanists were the same, they didn't have common names for their plants, then they would have to learn all the Latin names as well. Mine's just worse in botany. They're terrible. They love dividing things up into genera all the time. Unfortunately, we do have common names for the fungi, and I absolutely hate it. And this has happened to the bryophytes as well and many other parts of the natural world. It's all to do with the 1981 Wildlife and Countryside Act, a particularly rotten piece of legislation in parts, which insists on having a common name for everything that's endangered. So we don't know what's going to be endangered and what isn't. So everything gets a common name. The British Mycological Society decided they're going to make some up. So we had a perfectly respectable name, Tricholoma vercatum. It's now called the Silken Knight, which is not too bad. Entoloma incarnum, a lovely little pink-gilled fungus. That is now called the mouse pea pink gill. It's an indication of what it smells like. Then we have Tubaria furfuracea, which is, I have to call the scurfy twiglet, which is just embarrassing. I'm sure Tubaria furfuracea was perfectly happy being called that. Then we have this, I should quite like this one, Pachyella violacea nigra, which is the midnight disco. It's a little black disc fungus. Quite like the last one, don't you? That's the scurfy twiglet. Okay, let's get down to business. The structure of Latin names. I hardly need to tell you this, but I think we should go through it anyway. Structure, they are binomials. They are in two parts. Okay, you can have subspecies. We'll deal with those later. Forms and varieties and so on. They are binomials, or that's what the mycologists and botanists call it, and the zoologists call them binomials. Fairly interchangeable, just two words. Sometimes three, as I say. The first one, of course, is a generic name. So Homo, that's me, and you, we're all Homo. Our lovely little Shrew is Sorex, which is Latin for shrew, and so on. So that is the first part of the name, and you have to have two, otherwise it's not species. You just have the genus. It's a genus. Just have a genus name. It is just the genus. It could be anything. Then you have a specific name, also known as the specific epithet. Now, I had a glass of wine out there, but I wasn't allowed to bring it in because there's a specimen here, and I didn't want alcohol being spilt on this very precious specimen, so I had to make do with vodka. Let's say. Specific epithet. That's the second part of it. What it does is tell you which species within that genera your specimen is. It's also called the trivial name. It's a trivial name, which I always thought was trivial in comparison to the genus, because genera are more important, perhaps, or it could be argued, than species. So perhaps it's not. It's that. But I found out it was something quite different. This is one of the lovely pictures created by a very talented lady called Lizzie Harper. The original, and I've bought the original, they are that big. I got them all 14 are in this frame, about so big. They're tiny, but immaculate. This is, I'm sure you know, horsetail. The old name was a phrase name, and this is common before Linnaeus. You had phrased, the names were their description, and they are called phrase names. And so we have, I'm sorry I can't point at both at the same time, equisetum, let's do it, equisetum palastra brevi oribus folius polyspermon. That means the horsetail. It's a little bit like, anybody watch Friends? The Friends, the one where Joey picks his nose or something, that sort of thing. So basically this is the horsetail with very short leaves, lots of seeds, that likes growing in swamps, palustrous swamps. That was the name. That was the name. The binomial system had yet to be created by Linnaeus, almost incidentally. Of course, the bit, let's go back, what this bit after equisetum does, it tells you which of the horsetails it is. It is the horsetail with very short leaves, lots of seeds, that grows in swamps. That's the one we're talking about. That goes right back to Theophrastus. He talks about the celery of the hills and the celery of the vales and so on. But of course, if there was only one, you only have one name. There was only one larch, so it was a monomial. It only had a single name. Technically, it's still a phrase name, but it didn't need to be compared to anything else because it was the only one. We've got a copy here. This is the Systema Naturae of the three kingdoms of nature, arranged in classes, orders, genera, and species with their characteristics, differentials. differentia, which is really all this stuff. That was the bit we saw just now, palustrum and so on, palustrus and so on. And let me just have a quick look at this. This is Linnaeus' great invention. It was done almost inadvertently. He was a teacher, and he wanted to make things easy for people. We have enough trouble remembering binomials, 2 Latin names. But of course, in the past, they had to remember lots and lots of words to make up a Latin name. So here we have aves. Anybody like to pronounce that? Is it Pisci? It's not Pisces, is it? Cool. That is the class. That's the order, and that's a genus as far as Linnaeus is concerned. It would be different now, but the species are all down here. Let's have a look at the one at the bottom. This is Pica, which is the magpie. And what he does is he reproduces the C here, so that's corvus. And then that is the real name. That is the original specific epithet, albeit a phrase, in phrase form. But he also puts a little shorthand alongside. And that was his big breakthrough. Of course, people thought, well, let's not bother with that. Let's just do the shorthand. That was the big thing. And Linnaeus never really said it. He did eventually say, well, okay, you could just use that single word as the epithet. And it stuck. And it's such a useful thing. And it transformed the ordering of the natural world. It was a huge achievement. But it was, for all the many things he did, this is probably his greatest achievement, I think. Was that clear? Just say yes. Yeah, near enough. Okay. What's wrong with common names? Well, apart from the fact that I don't like them very much. What have Latin names got the common names lack? And why on earth Latin? Why not English? Why not Chinese? Lots of other things. Well, it's all down to several things. We have history. The history is important. Let's go through them. History. Well, it was a matter of history. Latin was the language of academic discourse at the time of Linnaeus. He was a Swede. He wanted to write to somebody in France or Italy. He just wrote in Latin, and whoever was there could write in Latin back. I guess if it all started now, it would be English. So this is Caspar Bohan, who Latinized his name. John Ray Latinized his name. I wish I could Latinize my name, because John Wright, it's just 2 syllables. They're not even long ones like James Bond, are they? So I was going to go for Johannes Faber. It's got more gravitas about it. I don't know if it will ever happen. And of course, it's back to our slide from Systema. Linnaeus used Latin as well, of course. And he was stuck with it, and so are we. But I don't think it's a bad thing. They are unique. Let's have a look. This is one of Lizzie's drawings, the Gilda Rose. I'm sure you know that one. Horrible tasting berries. But it's also known as dogwood, gatterbush, mugget, king's crown, stink tree. Stink tree is particularly appropriate. It smells of sick if you ever boil one up, so don't ever do that. But of course, that's just in English. I don't know if you go abroad, I think that's Spanish. Golden edge, which is probably snowball, reference to the white flowers, round white flower. Sorry, Schneeball. That's Russian. That's Korean. We're not going to get very far with these things. No, for one scientist, or indeed anybody, to talk about a particular species to someone in another country, you've got to have the Latin names. I'm sure you know this. It's kind of obvious, but they've just got to be there. So Viburnum opulus is its true name, and it is unique. What if unique names were created in English? I just don't think you could really do it. Take sorrel, for example. You've got sheep sorrel and sorrel. But you've also got wood sorrel. These are unrelated groups. I was going to say there, but let's. I do think that Latin names are a benefit, partly because they are so difficult. I know that it sounds counterintuitive, but if we started to use English names, we get them all mixed up. We start to change. We start to talk about, let's go on. I'll talk a bit more about that. Available, well, that just means there's enough of them. There's maybe 10 million species on Earth, and 500 books the size of my Naming the Shrew, which is, that's in 2 columns. It's a lot of species. And I should read this out. What, if using English, would one call the protozoan reindeer parasite Bensnoitia tarundi, bearing in mind that there are several hundred genera of such organisms, several thousand species? It would be practically impossible in English. Latin works. Doesn't work in English. For example, this is page 1 of the British checklist of Basidiomycetes. That's most mushrooms, and only the top one is visible. All the rest cannot be seen without a microscope or at least a lens. They are not ever going to have common names. They are stable. Well, we could argue about this for a long time. They're not anything like as stable as we would like. They change frequently. But when they change, they do change to rules. Every time you write a new, publish a new name for an existing species, then it is done for a reason. The reason is explained in the paper. There must be a reason. With English names, they will just suffer from nomenclatural drift, sort of Chinese whispers, and I think that would be a tragedy. Let's go on. Classificatory, possibly one of the most important things about Latin names, of course, they're being binomial. They have their classification they bear their classificatory nature on their sleeve, because it says every species, by definition, by its name, is placed within a genus. And this sort of fixes it in the natural world. If it's just a single word, you wouldn't be able to place it anywhere. It could belong to anything. So we have this one. This is a bird. I'm very keen on birds, but let's do one. This is Acridotheres cristatellus. I have no idea what bird that is. Anybody know what that is? No. Some sort of starling. Okay, we'll go with a starling. Because we know it's in the Acridotheres, we can then place it in it's in the genus Acridotheres. We can then place it in the family Sternidae, the order Passiformes, class Aves, the phylum. Just found a spelling mistake yesterday when I was looking into this. The phylum Chordata, the kingdom of the animals, and it's in Eukaryota. So it's true. Eukaryota means true nuts, by the way. If you're interested. You really can't do this with English names. I suppose going back to that sorrel, you have sheep sorrel and sorrel, but you also have wood sorrel. They are in different genera. I think they are in different families. So they were very difficult to actually move over to using English names. That's another Lizzie's pictures. I like that. That thing is microscopic. Oh, I like that one. Let's go through the types of Latin names that are used. Classical, vernacular, morphology, habitat, geographical, habit, use, eponym, and invented. Let's go through these as quickly as we can. Direct classical names, this is the most useful thing. You just use the Latin or the Greek. If it's Greek, then you just put it through Latin first. Have a go at those. Frog, toad, possibly toad, squirrel, owl, cat, mushroom, and flax. Thank you. Well done. Good. That's pretty straightforward. Can't do with everything. You can't do that with microscopic species. Latin, the Romans didn't have names for Latin species. So we have bufo, which is a toad, and there he is, picture of him. And this is an owl. This is actually a virtual tautonym because it is owl. That's leuco is another word for owl. And there he is. I reckon that thing's stuffed, don't you? I mean, how would you get a picture like that without stuffing it and backlighting it? This is a more sensible name. This is Strix rufipes, and rufipes means red feet. Well, I suppose they're a bit red, aren't they? Which is quite nice. So that's good. Also, the direct vernacular name. Linnaeus himself didn't like them, though he used a few himself. His famous Musa Cliffortiana, which is Clifford's banana. And there's a most wonderful book written about it. It's for his patron in Hagenkamp in Holland, but he used the Arabic name for banana. He didn't think much of this sort of thing, but more sensible is this banana. Actually, it was a plantain, it turned out. He had a hell of a job trying to get the thing to grow, and he couldn't understand its sexual apparatus. But he was very keen on sexual apparatuses, was Linnaeus, as I'm sure some of you will know. Gecko, that's a more modern one that uses the native name twice. Morphology, I think this is the most useful name, morphology. This really goes back to the differentia I was talking about earlier, the horsetail witch. has something or other. And we see this in Xylaria longipes. In fact, they're both morphological. Xylara means pertaining to wood, as in xylem rays, and longipes means long feet. I've got a picture of him there. There we go. It's about that big. Very, very, very common, or reasonably common in beech woodlands. We've got a few more descriptive names. Scabrum is, anybody? Scaly, Melanura, black, I think it's blacktail, isn't it? Blacktail. Grisio capillaris, this is me, grey hair, and also white arse, really, but bottomed, white bottomed. Describes me perfectly, actually. So it's a leucopygia. Pygia is rump, and leuco is white, grey, and hair, of course. There we go. These are really useful, because they actually tell you something about it and help to differentiate. These are names used correctly, if you like. I thought we couldn't really go past this without mentioning this one. This is Senecio squalidus, which is the Oxford ragwort, and here it is. It looks perfectly okay. Senecio squalidus, if you read it literally, means dirty old man. I just love that one, because it's rather nice. I think it's to do with it's a dandelion type plant, so it produces all these hairy seeds at the end. It looks like a beard. Habitat names, these are terribly useful as well. If you find something called something better, like Russula betula, you know it's Russula as a mushroom. Betula means he's growing with birch, so it's really helpful. And this one is more general, but it's Hygrossopy pratensis. I have one here, which is my... I found that at Kinkham Nature Reserve. Wonderful place, do go there, it's in Dorset, and that is Hygrossopy pratensis. Well, sort of, we'll see later. But pratensis means growing in a meadow, which is where it grows. And it's called the meadow waxcap. Nice. Ammophila arenaria, this is a marron grass. Ammophila means sand-loving, and Arenium arenaria means sand as well. So I think that's Greek and Latin, respectively. Basically, it's the sand-loving thing that grows in sand. Sort of reasonably helpful, I suppose. Geographical Ganoderma australis doesn't mean it comes from Australia. It means it's southern, which is what Australia means. Australia, the country, just means southern. We have trouble with Arctica and Antarctica. You can have there's one species, something or other, Antarctica. It's a fern. Antarctica is famous for not growing ferns of any sort. It just means southern fern. That's a more sensible one, Mexicana. So we know it came from, it came from Mexico, or at least the first specimen that was discovered was found in Mexico. Habit name, how it grows, Pseudoboletus, another mushroom. Sorry about the lot of mushrooms there, but I know more about them than anything else. Pseudoboletus parasiticus. It is a mushroom, little boletes, very similar to like a small cep or penny bun or porcini, if you like, which parasitizes another fungus called Scleroderma citrinum, which is an earth ball. That's quite nice. That is the blue Cocothrastes. It's nutcracker. So the blue nutcracker, which is a bird. Name indicating use. This really goes back to prehistory, because the early taxonomies were practical things. You wanted to put things, basically the world was divided up into, the natural world was divided up into three things. Things you could eat or found useful, things that would kill you, either by chasing you and ripping your throat out or poisoning you, and everything else. And so it goes back a long way. Mytilus edulis is the mussel. We have Lactarius Deliciosa, which is a mushroom. I'm afraid it's not quite as delicious as its name would suggest, but it tastes quite nice. These are rather... I actually put these in because I did this talk at the Chelsea Physic earlier this year, I think, or late last year. And officinalis is nothing to do with a fish oil. It's a different stem. It is an apothecary shop. So all these species are herbs. I can't remember the life of me what they are, but I'm sure some of you will know. What's salvia? Oh, God, so it is. Yeah, it's long, yeah. What's althea? Good, aren't you? I mean, this is like upstaged here by the audience. Speaker upstaged by audience. Bound to happen here, wasn't it? Good. Eponyms. Wow, this is a whole a nest of vipers, really. Basically, Linnaeus said that they should be used eponyms, where you actually provide a person's name for something, should be to honor scientists, naturalists, like, for example, Linnaeus. So we have Linnaeus. Sorry, it's Linnaeus. come on, someone else help me. Linnean borealis. This is the twin flower. I'm sure we have a specimen. We have a specimen here. Yeah. I should have asked for that, shouldn't? Oh yes, in the front there. So a beautiful, delicate little flower, and Linnean borealis. That was named for Linnaeus, not by him. Of course, it doesn't just have to be a great scientist or naturalist. It can be just someone you like, or anybody. So we have this. Anybody like to hazard a guess what it is? You can probably tell from the picture and the name. It's a turtle, indeed it is. And here he is in all his Terry Pratchett's. Is it the Great Artuin? So it was named for Terry Pratchett. This is quite a famous, notorious one. This was named for somebody dear to the heart of the taxonomist. It is named by an entomologists. They are notorious for their imagination. I think it's because of the enormous number of species they have to name. And here he or she is. And you see there's a little gap, and here indeed she is. I had a lot of fun looking that one up, so I think that's really good, don't you? That's appropriate use of names. Invented, of course, again, entomologists are the worst offenders here because they have a lot of things to name. You look like an entomologist down there, Sergeant. They use puns and anagrams and all sorts of things. So that's all. Letters arranged in different ways. Let's do a few odd names. I love these. People are very imaginative. So that's good. 3 eyes in a row. Where else would you see that? I have no idea what these. Sedusa medusa. It's beautiful, isn't it? I love this one. This is Egretta egretioides, which is the egret that looks like an egret. I think that's just brilliant. It does rather go against the idea of differentia, but that is ornithologists, of course, and they are also terrible. They're also terrible at using the oides, which means a bit like or looks like, as in, we use the word the ending oid ourselves, don't we? Let's have another. This is a virtual tautonym. This is Ziziphus ziziphus. I forgot to put zalaka, which I also rather like. What do you reckon comes next? You know. Okay, yeah, you knew. Rather silly. Oh, I love this one, Cartwrighti. Cartwright in 1967. Cartwright is the author. In formal writing, one would always put the author behind something, and it may be even an entire bibliography, but we'll just have the author here for the moment. This is seemingly an open and shut case of what I like to call nomenclatural onanism, which is naming something after yourself. I could find 3 references in the literature where it has happened. Maybe some of them, the fellows could, and others could tell me more. But in fact, it's not. The genus Cartwrightia was named for Professor Cartwright by one of his colleagues. Cartwright found another species within the genus Cartwrightia and named it for his brother. Cool trick, I think, don't you? This is a little test for you, by the way. I want to see whether we're going to get away with this or not. This is the Slipper Limpet. This means crepidulum. It's little sandal in Latin, which is a slipper, isn't it? Fornicator is a little bit more difficult to explain. Basically, they actually form breeding stacks. Have you ever seen them on the beach? You've seen the shells on the beach, curved. And in fact, it's nothing to do with their moral behavior. It is due to the fact that they are arched shells. They are arched shells. And of course, the Latin for an arch is fornix, and you end up with fornicator. If you want to know where fornication comes from, it is an ecclesiastical euphemism, and it was used by the church to describe immoral behavior, and it was a reference to the fact that the ladies of the night of negotiable virtues, as Terry Pratchett called them, the ladies of the night used to congregate underneath the arches. I thought that was a nice euphemism. We'll see another fornicator later, if you want to go there. There's some stuff at the end, you may want to slip away. One more? Okay, let's do this. Go on, let's say pizza pie. Pizzeria. Silly. Taxonomists having fun. You get these ridiculous names which actually don't. This is something that can happen. You find a genus and everything obeys the rules. You stick into that genus, and then you find one specimen which is clearly in that genus, and it ruins your generic name. So that is the one-leafed thing with two leaves. It happens quite a lot. Aarchinosaurus multidens. This is a sad tale. Does anybody know the story of Aarchinosaurus multidens? Yeah? No? Anybody ever heard it? Oh, this is a great story. It's one of the most tragic stories in taxonomy. Frankly, it was a self-imposed tragedy. There was an amateur paleontologist, Belgian gentleman called Georges Smets. And he went into a quarry at Aarchen, and he found some fossils, and he took them back, and he thought, right, I'm going to make a name for myself. And he examined them under his microscope and looked at them and decided it was a hadrosaur. And he published, and he decided it was a hadrosaur. It had I think we've got a picture of it. Yeah. It had a sort of big jaw for scooping up plants, and it was about as long as this table, and had lots of teeth, because Aarchinosaurus means the lizard from Aarchen with lots of teeth. And there's one of his fossils. Unfortunately, it was the fossils were examined by Professor Dollo from Paris, who found out it was just wood, and it was a fossil wood. And it's now there's the drawing of it, but it's now Archinoxylon. The oxylon bit is the termination given to fossilized wood. Xylon, of course. He actually, rather than just, oh, I'm sorry, guys, I made a terrible mistake, he actually went for the throat, carpe jugulum, to his accusers and made an absolute fool of himself, and eventually retired into obscurity. It was a most terrible tale of hubris, I think. So don't know if that happened to you. I would never name anything without talking to everybody I know who has any expertise in that field. But he wouldn't do that. But some names are just lovely. This is the wheat here, which is Oenanthe. It's very poetic, isn't it? That's my shrew again. I dare say some of you know this gentleman. He is a fellow. This is Professor Richard Forte. He is holding this book, which is the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, which will rattle through this because it will take too long otherwise. And he is in the international headquarters of the International Commission, Zoological Nomenclature, at the Natural History Museum. Just a few of the rules. This is rules. I'm sure if you ever write a Latin name or type a Latin name, you will use italics. In fact, there's no need to do so. It's merely convention. There's nothing in the rules that say you should. It just said it should be given preferably given in a different typeface of some sort. So often if you're writing them by hand, you would underline them or something, just to show that it's different. Of course, a lot of people think it's just a matter of being pretentious. Well, heaven forfend that we would ever be pretentious, but once you have mentioned a genus or a species, you can use just the abbreviation, the A. But you have to make sure you introduce the genus first, so you can't just go off with A domesticus, because it could be a cricket, a spider, or a mushroom. So you have to be careful. It has to be 2 letters long. That's one of the rules. You can't have A, but you can have AA. In fact, there's 2 AAs. One in zoological nomenclature and one in botanical, which includes fungi and seaweeds and algae. It must be Latinized, so it doesn't matter what language it starts off in the first place. If it's Greek, most Latin words are Greek, incidentally. Latin names are Greek. They must be Latinized. If it's Polish, it has to be Latinized. If it's English, it has to be Latinized. Wright becomes Wrightii, for example. It must be grammatical. This causes endless trouble. Certainly caused endless trouble to me because I told you how bad I was at Latin at school. And I had to send my text off to a Latin scholar. Basically, it means that the second half has to agree with the first half if it's in the normal form. So you have the genus effectively is a noun, and the specific epithet is a qualifier, so an adjective. And so they must agree in Latin. But sometimes, we've seen this already in Sorex Iranius, they are nouns in apposition. They are both nouns. They don't have to agree. I think we'll leave it there, don't you? They must be pronounceable. Well, goodness me. Something honoured in the breach, I think. It was quite fun trying to pronounce. We all had a bit of fun trying to pronounce those earlier, didn't we? Oh, we have to go over this rather quick. This is the nitty-gritty stuff. The rules deal a lot with synonymy, which is two or more names for one species, homonymy, which is two or more species for one name. Both of these cause catastrophes. And it's all settled by the principle of priority, which is basically everything, the first names win. Usually applies to specific epithets rather than genera, but can be both. First valid name to be published wins. I use valid in the looser sense of the word. I don't use it in technical terms because there's a lot of arguments over what that means, and the zoologists and botanists don't agree on what the word valid means. Then we have our... that's my meadow waxcap again. Nice picture. But names change all the time. This is one of the big complaints, not the fact that people can't pronounce them or understand them. Once they learn them, damn things change. When I first discovered, learned the meadow waxcap, it was called Hygrophorus pratensis, then it became Camerophorus pratensis, then Cuphophyllus pratensis, then Hygrossebe pratensis. It was that for years. Well, that went, and now it's Hygrossebe pratensis var pratensis. Well, I say now because my friend Brian, who's really one of the best identifiers of just about everything I know, he said, "Oh, John, it's gone back to Cuphophyllus again now." So I reckon if I wait long enough, it'll go back to Hygrophorus, don't you? They always say if you live long enough, it'll always go back to the name you learned when you first started. Here's the abbreviation. Of course, if I'm in Paul, then it would have been Agaricus claviformis and so on. This happened to another group of fungi, the ink caps. This is Coprinopsis picacea, magpie. See, pica again. Magpie because of the interesting colour of the cap, pattern on the cap. They were all Coprinus at one point, and it's now divided up into Coprinus, Coprinopsis, Coprinellus, and Parasola. This is one of the reasons names change, is because of new understanding of how things are related. Coprinus, the incaps, was a very large and unwieldy genus, and really it was ripe for splitting. In fact, it was overripe for splitting. Coprinus, Coprinopsis, and Coprinellus are actually all in the Agaricaceae, so they're all in the same family. But Parasola, which was also in Coprinus once upon a time, was in a different family altogether, in the Sathuralaceae. So they really didn't belong together, so they had to be split. But of course, unfortunately, there weren't very many Coprinus within the original genus, or the subsequent genera. So we are just left with a handful of Coprinus. Everything else has had its name changed. Hundreds of species have had their names changed just by change of the genus. There is another reason why things change their name, and that's back to the principle of priority. Viburnum fragrans, this is a very familiar, well, not to me because I don't do gardening, very familiar garden plant, I understand. Everybody's quite happy to call it Viburnum fragrans for years. And then William Stern, the great taxonomist, discovered a previous publication which had it as Farrerii, and that's a true name. Viburnum Farrerii is its real name. But everybody calls it that still, fragrans. In fact, you'll see Viburnum fragrans brackets Farrerii, just sort of as a nod to taxonomic usage. But it's very annoying. This is the thing that happened to Brontosaurus, I'm sure you know. We have types. Let's just rattle through types. It's really important. We've got one here. We have one of the most important and impressive types. And I feel very, in fact, could you just hold it up so everyone can see? This is one of Linnaeus' own. This is Zeus faber, the John Dory. Very tasty, though not anymore. This one is past his cell... Oh, don't you drop it.
If I drop it, it's not so bad.
No. This is the type specimen. This is the one, basically a type, if you are naming a species and you have it in front of you, you do a description, you write it all up, the type specimen, ideally, is the one you examined most closely. And this is the type for Zeus faber. And let's see my place now. So typification. So if it really wasn't done in Linnaeus's time, or until really relatively recently, and it's very important. What it does is link a specimen, tie a specimen to a name, not a species, but a specimen to a name, which is very helpful. If you have any doubts, you can go back to the types of something you found. Maybe you think it's a different species. You can go to the type specimen and see if it compares. If you actually nowadays, if you say, okay, I've done it. This is the thing I examine most. This is the type specimen. That's the holotype. The syntype. If you don't do that, then you end up with syntype. I think that's what most of the Linnaean collection would have been, a syntype. I'm sure. I get very confused with this, so I'm sorry if it's wrong. It doesn't make any difference really. Lectotype. That's if you have a great big box full of stuff and no one said which one is the type. So you go in there, you say, okay, that's it. That's the lectotype. All the ones left over are paralectotypes. I have a lot of trouble with the next one. I can't for life remember what it is. Anybody know or care? Good. Right, let's go on to the next one. A neotype. If Linda had actually dropped Zeus Faber on the floor and trodden on it, that would have been destroyed or lost, and we would have to come up with a neotype. Thank God you didn't. That's one of the most beautiful specimens in the collection. An epitype is also a replacement. If you have something in the collection, you think, oh, it's no good. Maybe it's been looked at too often, and it just fallen to pieces. So you have to make a new type. There are lots of types. There are about 270 different types of types. So we better keep going, haven't we? So let's go on for the next one. Ambiguotype, which means it's something sometimes quite literary. Nobody can make head or tail of. And a daotype, this is the first specimen that has ever had its genitals examined. They're a funny lot, these people, aren't they? Kleptotype, this goes back to the story of an institution museum. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's too good not to be true. And that's where the museum was very pleased to receive a bequest from a regular visitor of a very large number of specimens, rather ruined when they realized that all these specimens has been periodically removed from the collection over the years. So those are kleptotypes. The opposite really is when Professor Smith dies and he gets wheeled out and everybody empties his office and they find a lot of type specimens which they thought had been lost up on his shelf. They're neglectotypes. If you've replaced the neglectotypes because you thought they were lost with neotypes, the neotype being replaced by the neglectotype become neocotypes. I hope you're keeping up. There's a test later. Atypicotype, this is a type where even the taxonomist concern doesn't think it looks anything like the species to which it is tied. There is no rule that says it should be, but that's good. Copulotype, this only happens really in paleontology. May I leave you to work out what that is? All I would say is you get 2 for the price of 1. That's enough of those. Can we just do gorilla, gorilla, gorilla? I think these need explaining, don't you? Does anybody know how they work? I'd be interested to know if anybody else has worked out how these come about. These are not allowed, these triple tautonyms. You get double tautonyms and triple tautonyms. Only allowed in zoology. The botanists, mycologists, phycologists, under the ICN, International Committee of Nomenclature, will have nothing to do with them, which I think is a bit of a shame. So rather poetic, some of them. This is gorilla, gorilla. How on earth? Nobody would have named anything gorilla, gorilla, gorilla. It was just one of those things. It was a matter of obeying the rules and history. Okay, this is... Linnaeus was absolutely hopeless with... he wasn't the greatest zoologist, but when it came to the great apes, and particularly man, although he was so... he had enough understanding to actually include us in the natural world, which is, it's quite a thing in the mid-18th century. As far as he was concerned, we were just another species, which is what we are. But he wasn't very good, but I don't think that's a Linnaean name. But the gorilla was called Troglodytes. Did anybody else say troglodytes, or was it just me being pretentious? Me being pretentious, okay. Troglodytes, that was original. Then they thought, well, no, troglodytes, that really applies to the other great apes, the chimpanzees. So this often happens. You get the specific epithet promoted to generic status. Up he goes. So we had to think of another specific epithet. And it's a scary-looking thing, so we called it savagei. But then the principal priority kicked in a few years later. So it had to be gorilla, gorilla. So they had to go back to the original specific epithet. And then some fool went and found a subspecies. They thought, okay, there's more than one gorilla, so we're going to have to do a subspecies. It needs a subspecific epithet. Now, when you name a subspecies, the original species has to have its specific epithet repeated, and hence you get gorilla, gorilla, gorilla. There we go. This has happened to us. We have Homo sapiens, more or less, Homo sapiens. Idao 2, this is an extinct subspecies of us. Of Homo sapiens, and of course we then had to have a repetition of our specific epithet. It doesn't, I've seen this written a few times, Homo sapiens means wise man. What this does not mean is doubly wise man. It's just a matter of the rules. I'm really not sure whether I should do this bit, but this is a lion. You knew that. You know. Anybody, any idea which lion it is? Yeah, well, no, that was terrible, wasn't it? I don't know. You need to be a zoologist. Now, apparently there are 4 or maybe 5 subspecies of lion in Africa. Basically, they are populations, really, rather than species. They're subspecies. But the zoologists said they're subspecies. But there's very little to tell between them. And I thought, and I subsequently read a paper which also suggests, and I promise you I'm not a white supremacist, absolutely not, that really human beings should be divided up into subspecies if we are to keep the same standards we showed for the lion. And this would mean we would end up with Homo sapiens sapiens. That's, well, we'll see who they are. Well, this is just my guess. I'm not even sure if it's grammatically accurate. Homo sapiens africanus, Homo sapiens orientalis, and maybe a couple more. I don't think it's I quite like the idea in a way because it's a sort of celebration of the fact we're all different, which I think is really rather nice. But sorry?
What happens is they have a mother who is
Well, they don't allow hybrids are frowned upon in zoology, so you're not allowed to. Okay. Orientalis. I need to. Anybody know what or who the type specimen? It's Linnaeus. This was established in a nomenclatural act. Nomenclatural acts are really any publication pertaining to nomenclature. I've written a book and I've written articles and I have made nomenclatural acts. And unlike most scientific papers, they live forever. They cannot be forgotten. And as soon as William Stern in 1959 said that Linnaeus himself must stand as a type of his Homo sapiens, that became the truth of the matter. And the type specimen of Homo sapiens is now resting peacefully under Uppsala Cathedral. But what it also means is that well, you can read it for yourself. Homo sapiens sapiens is Caucasian, which I think is most, maybe not all of us, Caucasian. There is no differentiation. There's no value judgment. Just because the specific epithet is repeated, there's no judgment like this is the true species and everybody else is a subspecies. It's just the subspecies that was named first. It's just a nomenclatural thing. So we would be Caucasian. Most of us, I think, look around, 1 or 2, there you go, gentleman over there, would be Homo sapiens sapiens. All right, okay, are you ready for this? I'm going to go through this very quickly. All right, perils ahead. Now, are you up for this? This is rude names, okay? If you are dubious, I promise you, I will not mind if you leave. Seriously. You say that, but I know halfway through you'll be going, oh my God, it really is rude. Okay. I first started taking people out on mushroom forays in Dorchester adult education, and at the end of the day, I would lay everything out on the table, on a full mica top table, and put all the specimens down there, and I'd write in one of those whiteboard markers and the Latin name underneath, and the common name if I could be bothered. And I'd wipe it off at the end. But one day I used a permanent marker and couldn't get the bloody writing off, so, and I thought, no, well, I'll clean it as best I can, but I just couldn't do it. I folded it up and stuck it right at the back of the stack of folding tables. And on Wednesday, halfway through the week, the principal phoned me up and said, John, we've had the most terrible complaint. this gentleman from the art class has come in. He said, I've just got this table out, and it's covered in filthy words. And, okay, this is what we had. We had Phallus impudicus, which is the stinkhorn, Clitosobe nebularis, Amanita vaginata, and Geastrum fornicatum. I promise you another fornication, so here we are. And you can kind of see what he meant. There's just... So we're going to do, this is carry-on taxonomist. We're going to rattle through these so they won't stick in your memory. One of the worst ones is the suffix. Well, it is pronounced anus. I'm sorry about that, but it is. That is the pronunciation. When people say, when Patrick Moore used to say Uranus, that was wrong. It was Uranus, and I'm sorry. I don't think this is an eponym. This was to honour Professor Alphonse, I think. And I don't suppose he was minded too much, having something named Alphonsianus after him. I don't think the Coburn family would have been too pleased with Cockburnianus, but and Sore. I don't make these up. These are published things. Soreness, and there's Hairbuger. Okay, one more, just quickly. Okay, right, that's enough. You saw that one. Professor Roy Watling is a long-term friend of mine, one of the great living mycologists at Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. He was telling me about this one. There's another famous bolitologist, that's seps, penny buns and boletes, mushrooms, was Walter Snell, and he found a new species of Lexinum, and he wanted to honour Walter Snell. And he said he ended up using Snellii, because the alternative was completely unthinkable. I shall leave you to join the knots up. The Snellianus just wasn't going to cut the mustard, really. This is quite a famous one. This is the channeled rack, and you can see a little channel. Now, channels are common morphological features in the natural world, of course. So we have that. It's Purvetia canalic. This is a pun. If you don't get the pun, I'm not going to explain it to you. It's Purvetia canaliculator. Which is not too bad. Pomacia, this is the channeled snail, Pomacia canaliculator. Unfortunately, there is also Erica. I was very pleased. This is one I found myself. When I was researching the book, I was doing the prefixes and suffixes that you can add to a Latin word or any word to give it more meaning. So macro is a big something. So you have lepiota, and then you have macrolepiota. It just extends the usage. This is one of the fibre caps. I can't reach that far. One of the fibre caps. It's got radiating fibres on there. They're quite small. Most of them are brown. This is a lovely cream colour. Inosobe means fibre cap. Now, the prefix I was looking at was EU, which is Greek for good or true or nice. So you have euonymus, of good name. Eulogy, a good word. Euonymus is the spindle tree, I'm sure some of you know. But then I thought, eutheles, what does that mean? And I looked it up, but basically this, eutheles means nice tits, and I'm really sorry about that, but that is absolutely... This is a private joke by a 19th century mycologist, and I think I'm the first one to discover it. You can understand the problem that mycologists have. The next picture was taken at River Cottage, and it is not photoshopped, it is not arranged, this is exactly how they appeared. And you can see the problem that mycologists can have. If you want to know how big they are, they're about that big. So it's getting worse now. Linnaeus was the very worst at doing this sort of thing. I fancy he was very sexually frustrated man, and his sexual appetites for frustration comes through in his writing. He was much criticised at the time, particularly for his sexual system of classification of plants, or at least identification of plants. But he could spot things a mile away. Marvel at that word is exactly what you think it means. I'm sure you know. Can we just do this very quickly? We have a picture of it. We've got 2 seconds to look at it. And there's his drawing. There we go. One for the girls. This is Phallus impudicus, which means impudent penis. We also have in the fungi a lot of these are vulvas. It's a bag at the base. Vagina is just sheath, Latin for sheath. It was actually the sheath of a dagger. And of course, it's a morphological feature that appears again and again. And that's in Amanita vaginata. I'm just about to run over. I think we're going to be okay. There's also a bryophyte, a moss. This was a vaginaria. There's also a species within it, Vaginaria vaginata, which is rather over-egging the pudding. Vaginaria vulgaris, which is a common one. You won't believe this, but this is perfectly true. I have an author citation to come after this, and that's who wrote it. I just could not believe that, but it's perfectly true. In case you think it's almost terrible, there was these little gems by Kirkcaldy in 1912, and they're all bugs of some sort. I'm sure you can pronounce it. So it's Dolly kissed me, Polly kissed me, Peggy kissed me, Mary kissed me, and Florrie kissed me, which is very nice considering what we saw before. Thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to questions now.